like you mentioned there, you've watched a good amount of McNeese. What have you seen out of this team that is the reason at the time we're recording this, they're 26-3, they're 27-3, one of only a couple teams who have gotten to that mark. What have you seen out of this team up to this point?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to like. I think there's a couple things that you see that kind of correlate to postseason success in March in the conference tournament and the NCAA tournament, especially for underdogs. They're a great three-point shooting team. I think they're top 10 in the country right now, give or take. They shoot like 38, 39% from three. Having guys outside of Shahade Wells who can shoot off the wing and shoot off the bounce and create, I think is massive because Shahade is awesome. Like everyone knows that he's the best player in the conference. He's one of the best mid-major players in the entire country. He's been around the ringer of TCU. I think he's sixth year technically in college, so he's experienced. But that and then the turnover margin. I mean, I have never seen a team that at this level, at least in the Southland for sure, force that amount of turnovers night in, night out against good opponents too. When they played UAB and I think the Michigan game, they forced a ton of turnovers and they do a good job of taking care of the ball. So I think that is a really, really big cause for success against some bigger power teams in the tournament.
You mentioned the turnover rate. One thing you do on TikTok and Twitter is you measure the turnover rate and the trapezoid of excellence, you call it. Where does McNeese rank in that? They're one of the best mid-major teams in the country in
Yeah.
terms of turnover percentage, like you mentioned there.
Yeah, well, I'll say that they, in really most advanced metrics, it supports McNeese State compared to a lot of other smaller schools and even on the mass scale because a lot of times when you put things in for adjusted for opponents and the quality of opponent, a team like McNeese State is going to drop heavily because they're playing against Nickel State and Southland teams and stuff, but they stay up there because of how good they've been. The trapezoid of excellence is like a pace thing. It's like a pace by adjusted net rating, and they kind of sit in the realm of where St. Mary's and Dayton are kind of right under, not right under Houston, but towards where Houston is, just not at that level of efficiency, of course. But I think it's a good thing because if they can get a team that is used to playing a lot of possessions and playing really fast, like Alabama, they might be able to match up with where their seed rank should be. They could take them out of their comfort zone. And Alabama is used to playing, we'll call it whatever, 150, 200 possessions. And then all of a sudden, McNeese State cuts that in half because they take up the whole shot clock. They have a good defense to force them into a half court game. So I think it's going to be matchup. It's definitely going to be matchup specific for a team that plays a slow and methodical pace. But if they get the right one, like they're going to be in for a whirlwind, whoever they're playing against.
So speaking of matchup base, you put out bracketology every week and your
Mhm.
bracket predictions. Right now, McNeese looks like they're going to be somewhere around a 12 seed. Do you think it's possible? Obviously, the last two 11 seeds are the last four in the playing games, but do you see a possibility for McNeese if they win the Southland tournament next week? Is it possible for them to get to that 11 seed, or is 12 kind of their ceiling?
I I think there's a way. It's probably a slim chance. They need Indiana State and Princeton and JMU and Drake to not be their champions of their conference because those teams have very strong resumes as again similar level mid-major teams. Even then, if they lose and another team takes it over, it could make room for different bubble teams to come in. But I think that's the realm. If they have all those teams that are right with them or right ahead of them lose and they can get an 11 seed, there's potential. But I think 12, maybe 13, if there's a bunch of bid stealers or something like that, could be a realistic thing too.
So that said, if they stay at the 12, which right now most the consensus is they'd be at 12 right now.
Right.
Who are some of those five seeds that if McNeese got a good draw against one of those five seeds, what does a good draw look like for McNeese?
Yeah, I there's a lot of ways to go about it. I think a team that's going to let them have their way on the offensive end shooting. I mentioned Alabama before and Auburn. I think those two teams could be decent where they could really flip the game into a turnover battle and crunch the game down and make them uncomfortable. They should be able to have their way, especially with Alabama shooting the three ball. I know you would like that Alabama versus McNeese State.
Not exactly. I would probably hear a lot from Wade about that.
It'd be good. I do think there are some teams like San Diego State's size, like and physicality. Are they going to be able to compete with them? Because I think they've done a decent job on the boards, on the glass, and playing inside all year. But they are a relatively smaller team, and when they play against a team, San Diego State's not a power conference team, but they might as well be against a power conference level physicality and athletic team with a guy like Jaden Ledee. Like, are they going to be able double team and have a good defensive scheme, good enough to kind of make up for that size mismatch. So San Diego State is probably going to be around that 4 or 5 range. I still think that it could be a good matchup because they play similar paces and styles. But I think I like the Auburn and Alabama matchups a little bit. Yeah.
So you put out a video, I think about a month ago or so. You labeled McNeese as one of the teams that could make that Cinderella run that
Mhm.
one or two or more teams make every single year. Why is that? What about McNeese do you see matching up well once they get into the tournament? Is because obviously they've beaten solid opponents in VCU, UAB,
Right.
obviously Michigan. They're not in that same realm, but they're a Power Five team or a Power Conference team on the road. So, what about McNeese do you see that makes them capable of potentially making a run in March?
Yeah, and the things I mentioned about the metrics and like the pace and the turnover margin, the 3-point shooting, and having guys that can score on any given night, all those on top of kind of what you mentioned, like they are kind of battle tested. They have lost a couple of games. I think all three of their losses were really, really tight. Those
Yeah,
teams you
two
mentioned, like
points,
yeah,
9 points, and 2 points. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's um those games kind of happen and flip either way, and no one's gonna win every single game in the year. Really, it's just not gonna happen. And just you lose a couple every now and then, even to lesser opponents. But winning on the road against VCU, who is could be a tournament team for sure, and they're pretty close to a tournament level team. UAB, Michigan, like those are good teams, especially compared to a team from the Southland Conference. Even though Michigan stinks this year, it doesn't really matter. So I do think that that kind of gives me enough confidence to say, great, they can do what they do best against good teams. I am not worried about that at all. And outside of their home, I think 16-0 at home this year, which is unbelievable. One the best team in the country, really, at home because they haven't lost. But they're able to do it on the road and away from home, which is awesome. They have experience, and I think when it comes down to it, if you remember, what year was this? I want to say like 2 or 3 years ago, New Mexico State played UConn in the first round. Teddy Allen just at some point he had to take over. He had no choice, and the game script was kind of thrown out the window. And Shahade can 100% be that guy. I think he's got a similar level of grit and nastiness to him when he needs to, and he's a tough player, and not enough people know about him. So,
So speaking of Sade, obviously he's the front runner to win the Southland Conference Player of the Year.
mhm.
He's capable of dropping 30 any given night. And so what have you seen about him and why is that so important? Because obviously once you get to March, once you get to the NCAA tournament, it feels like guards are the primary contender for what makes a Cinderella team as you
Right.
get deeper and deeper in the tournament.
Yeah, I think having obviously an experienced guard is important, especially for the teams that are trying to make runs. You see that with Loyola, we saw that with Nevada, with the Martin twins a couple of years ago, and having someone who is comfortable in the backcourt to run the offense, not just talented. And he's obviously talented. He was JUCO at first. He played at UT Arlington. He went to TCU for 2 years. Like he has been through the ringer of everything. So if I want a guy to run my team, run an offense, to beat a huge power conference team in the NCAA tournament, maybe not once, maybe not twice or 3 times, whatever it's going to be. It's a guy like that that understands those systems and understands those levels of athleticism and physicality and quality in the player. And I think it's really going to help him break down other teams. I know he wasn't amazing at TCU. He was a role player for the most part in his 2 seasons, but being able to play at a good Big 12 team that's a tournament team every year and in and out of the top 25, I think goes a long way on top of him being obviously super talented and having a lot of upside as just a natural talent player.
Outside of Wells, you can't really talk about McNeese without talking about Christian Shoemate and what he's done being on Sports Center, I think 8 times this year for top 10 plays, and he's had the number one play, I think, twice. What do
Yeah,
you see out of Shoemate and how does his physicality and his size or lack thereof match
right.
up once they get into if they get into the tournament?
No, you kind of hit it. And I mentioned before my concern about the size, where he plays well above his size. I think what I don't know what he's listed at, probably like 6'7" max, give or
Yeah, I think
take.
he's 6'7", 6'8".
Right. And even if that, if he's 6'6", 6'7", like he plays like a small ball five on the college level, especially for a mid-major team. And I think that's big. He's like FDU won one game last year, but that's how they played. That's how St. Peter's played. Their biggest guy in the rotation was like 6'7", 6'8". He was not that big. And I think in the right sense, just looking at it on paper and saying he's only 6'7" doesn't work. He's clearly a great rebounder. He's physical. He's got great athleticism. So having him next to Shahade and Garcia and a couple of the other guards on the team like is huge because If he goes into foul trouble, that's one thing, or if he's not healthy, obviously. But as long as he's on the floor, you have enough to compete with guys like I mentioned Jaden Ledee before, who you might draw up against, and those bigger stars in the country.
So that's kind of all the questions I had in pertains to this team, but I'm gonna put you on the spot a little bit. Do you think obviously he signed a new contract about a month ago. Do you think there's a possibility Will Wade leaves McNeese for another job next season?
Man, I've been thinking about this for weeks, I swear. The possibility for sure. If that's the question, the answer is yes. My gut says that he would probably go, considering Shahade is going to be gone and a couple of the other guys. That is, I think, going to be the turning table, especially with the transfer portal, and probably see some guys try to move up. I do think if they succeed in the tournament, if they get to the tournament, if they win even a game, they're going to be on such a massive radar, bigger than they already have been, even for Will Wade. So I think that would really propel him to be poached, and someone will buy out the rest of his contract, and which would be good for McNeese State also. But I don't think his time here is going to be long. I think it's pretty evident, right? My gut would say that if they win a tournament game, he's gone.
What are that being said, what are some of the potential landing spots you see as options for Wade? Obviously, he's been tied to the DePaul job forever. I don't personally see that as a possibility, but what are if he does end up leaving, what do you see as some of the potential landing spots for Wade?
Yeah, and I think it would have to be a Power Five job or like a really high level Mountain West or A10 job or something. I still think it would have to be a Power Five team. I mean, you know better than I do, also as a person too. But kind of like you said, like the DePaul thing is interesting. Is that enough, enticing enough to be able to go? Like we saw Ed Cooley go to Georgetown from Providence, obviously, but like Georgetown has even though the program is absolutely in the gutter, and they still kind of are. They're working their way out, like there was enough history and enough brand recognition and location to get out of there. DePaul has just like it's kind of been a wasteland for a little while, and that's and with a high player turnover and low quality of ball and success and stuff. I still think that's a job that he might take. I don't think Ohio State it could try to go after him if Dusty May is out of the question, if Sean Miller's out of the question, a couple of guys like that. I'm honestly not sure what kind of job is going to open up because I don't think any of the ones that are open besides those two really are going to entice him enough.
So Brian, you're obviously here. You're doing color for the Southland semi or for the first and second rounds. One of the teams, obviously, that's kind of burst onto the national landscape has been McNeese. What have you seen out of them this year that is the reason they're 28-3 as they enter the tournament here?
Yeah, man, I think it just starts with the talent. You look at the league, you just got the awards that just came out. Coach Wade was able to get Coach of the Year. That's pretty obvious. Then winning the championship and having his turnaround. But Shahada Wells, Player of the Year, Newcomer of the Year, a guy who is a JUCO All-American, a guy who had a great career when he was at UT Arlington, good enough that he could level up to TCU, and was good enough to play in the Big 12. Didn't play as much as he probably wanted, didn't have the role he wanted. So him having that experience at UT Arlington, then transferring back to the level that was lower than a Power Five level, I think he knew that he wanted to go out with a bang and be able to really dominate, and he's done just that. So I think it starts with the head of the snake, as they say. So Shahada Wells is a playmaker. He's a scorer. He's a defender. He's an athletic player who really has no limitation at this kind of level of what he can do. And really, in any given game you play in a tournament, he's good enough to be the best player on the floor because he's playing with so much confidence and he has such a big role and he's been doing it all year long. He's comfortable doing it. So I think that starts with him. And then Christian Shoemate, I actually did this tournament last year, the first two rounds as well. And McNeese was able to win those games and largely single-handedly almost because of his play. He's an extremely high motor, kind of versatility combo forward that can really dominate the glass. Obviously, he's been on SportsCenter multiple times with his athleticism, being able to play above the rim and get some highlight dunks. But, you put those two together, anytime you have a big man or a forward and a guard that are that dynamic, it starts there to me. Christian Shoemaker and both those guys are very tough. They're versatile. They're hard matchups. And, you know, because Christian Shoemaker is not a guy you have to just give the ball to in the half court, he does a lot of his damage in transition and on the offensive glass. Yeah, it starts with those two, but then you just have talent around them. You have shot making around them, you have talent around them, you have different ways that you can win a game. And then I just think Will Wade is underrated as a basketball coach. I think people get distracted with some of the other things within his career, but he's won everywhere he's been and won at a high level. He's an extremely intelligent person, and he understands how to get young people to buy into something, to believe into something, and then he knows the basketball game, the nuances, and how to make the adjustments. So I think really you have a really awesome formula of all those things coming together, and to be able to win 28 games, it only builds even more onto a collective belief as a team and a confidence that makes you think you can beat anybody.
Like you said, a confidence to be able to beat anybody. I think to win in March, a lot of it comes down to the guard play, and
Yep.
they have that in Shahade Wells. They have DJ Richards coming off the bench, and Mike
Yep.
Saunders and Omar Cooper have been good as well. But Shahade specifically, he's the only player on this team who's been to the tournament. He's been there twice with TCU. What do
Right.
you see out of him that could help them get back there over the next two games, hopefully the next two games, and then just kind of see out of him in general, obviously the player of the year in the Southland.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody talks about his defense a lot, but he's also a guy who gets steals at a high rate. He's very good at anticipation. He's very good on the defensive side of the ball. So, he's a guy that's not going to get in a lot of foul trouble typically too. So he's on the floor. So I think those two things, starting wise, it just helps you. He's not a guy that's just an offensive player. He's able to generate offense by playing in the passing lanes and getting steals. But yeah, he's a playmaker. I mean, he's a guy. This is playing in March is about your guard play. You just said that, and if you have a guard, so much of college basketball and basketball in general, you have scouting that's going to say, hey, we're going to take these plays away. We're going to take these actions away or make it hard. But as you mentioned, Shahade is a player that can make a play at any given time. He can play in isolation. He can play in ball screen. He can play within sets. He's great in transition. He's electric there. So I think, when it comes down to guard play, you have a guy who can make shots. He can create shot creation is a big thing they talk about in the NBA, right? Somebody who can create a shot for himself or for others, So he has that ability at the highest level. And he's done it. He's played at the highest level. He has confidence. He's got a swagger. He's a tough player. He's able to get to the free throw line as well, which you also need out of your guards. He's physical. He's tough to where he's not afraid to draw contact. So, yeah, he's one of those guys that can have monster performances as we've seen. He can have 30-point games, but he also is, you look at some of the best NBA players and guards too. Those guys are able to score at a high level, but they're also able to distribute at a high level. And so he's a very unselfish and willing passer and has a great IQ. He's not one of those guys. All he can do is score, or all he can do is score at the rim. There's no place on the court when he's on it that he can't get a bucket. So when you have a guy like that, and he's also been through it. Again, I mentioned, even in junior college, he's been doing this his entire career. This is not a new thing for him. And he's been playing at an elite level. And that's how he was able to go from junior college to the UT Arlingtons of the world. At the time, I believe they were in the Sun Belt. And so to go from there to the Big 12 level, you have to have some production. And so he's a guy that's produced, but then he's also been in a role where he wasn't able to produce like he wanted to. So now being able to transfer back down to a lower level, he can kind of step back into a more dominant role. And, you need alphas when it comes down to games where you're playing against other teams where they're going to game plan against him. Every team in this conference has game plan to stop him. Every team all year long has tried to stop him. And he's still been able to produce. And I think that's part of what you need to have, those players that aren't afraid of the moment, that aren't afraid of kind of seeing all different types of defenses and all different types of strategy to slow him down. And he's just, again, a special player. That's what you need to be able to make runs in March.
McNeese obviously isn't the tallest team, but they have Christian Shoemate, just won Defensive Player of the Year, entered the transfer portal last year, but decided to come back. He plays, for the most part, plays taller than he actually is. What do you see out of their front court and how they can hold up as they go to the semis, to the hopefully to the Southland Conference Championship, and then potentially the NCAA tournament as well?
Yeah, it's all about matchups in the tournament. When you're able to get matchups that you want, obviously they have to do it in this tournament. They have lost only one conference game. So there's, the good thing about the Southland is, and Coach Wade talked about this when we interviewed him, you know, part of the reason why you like this job is because you do get the double bye that puts you in the semis. You only have to win 2 games. So they're able to rest. They're able to kind of, focus on who's there in front of them. But I love Christian Shoemate's game. I think the tournament is about matchups. So when you have those matchups, what makes him unique is that he can get so much done in the paint. He does play bigger than what he is. He's athletic. That's part of what makes him be able to play bigger than what he is. But he just has a relentless motor. And when you have a motor, that's a talent that you can't just put on a scouting report and say, oh, we have to play harder than him. You actually have to show up and do it rather than saying, hey, he's a shooter, don't give him space, or he's this, you got to take this away. Guys that play with that kind of motor and that kind of athleticism, they're hard to take out of a game, and they draw so much attention. But he's also so good at being able to drive to the basket and finish off the bounce and play from the perimeter. So he's able to stretch teams that may have a bigger big playing in that position. Very good at that. But then also he's got a real knack for his short range game and being able to make mid range jump shots, being able to make shots that he's not all the way at the rim, but he's kind of in that restricted area where he can still make these little fadeaways and pushaways. And then he's also a guy who's not afraid for contact either. He's, when you're aggressive and you can get to the foul line and you can get other teams in the bonus, or you can get yourself in the bonus, other team in foul trouble, it puts a lot of pressure on the other team as well. So I would just say his versatility, his toughness, his athleticism, his motor. Again, it starts with them, and then they have enough size around them, whether it's C.J. Felder or whether it's some of the other guys that kind of contribute to what make their front line. But I think the tournament is about having depth. It's about having some shot making, but it's also about having some guys that can perform on big stages. And I know I'm predominantly talking about those two, and you asked me about Shoemate, but those two are the head of this, and that's what makes them have such a chance. And
So
you
you
also
mentioned
mentioned that they went to the transfer portal. The funny part about that, Coach Wade talked about it, is he actually came back to Coach Wade to say, hey, I think I want to, come back here. He was kind of coming around workouts, and guys were telling him how things were going as he was gone. And I think it's been a perfect thing on that too, because he knew his value at this level and what he could do, and probably didn't know the season was going to go as well as it did, but definitely very impressive how it's gone.
So, like you said, very impressive how it's going. You've been around the Southland forever. You were telling me you coached in the conference. Have you
Yeah.
seen Stephen F. Austin? Obviously, when they beat Duke and Cameron, is a team that sticks out. But where do you rank this McNeese team along with the previous Southland teams we've seen? Obviously, they're one of the best teams not only in the Southland Conference but in the country as well.
Yeah, the Southland, it's had a history, a recent history anyway, of having some teams in the league that can really make some noise in the tournament. You go back to Stephen F. Austin with Brad Underwood's teams. That's part of when I was a part of the league. They were dominant in the conference, similar to what this McNeese team is. They had a defense that could turn you over. They had depth. They had a toughness. They had Nathan Walkup at that time, who was kind of one of their featured players. And they were just really, really good at what they did. They were dominant. And this McNeese team has been dominant. The Abilene Christian teams with Joe Golding, who I actually worked for when I was in this conference, they weren't quite as dominant maybe during the regular season. But I don't know that you can have a more signature win than beating the flagship school and playing Texas in the tournament. Getting to the tournament is one thing, but then being able to have success in the tournament, because you're not going to have a great seed. You're going to be vastly undermatched as far as your seed. You're going to be anywhere from, 16 to 12 maybe, or if you're fortunate, or 13. So you're going to have a high seed matchup, and you're going to have to go in and really upset somebody. So Abilene Christian being able to do that kind of upset in the tournament, I believe that year with Stephen F. Austin, they had a tournament win as well. And then, you think about even like Kyle Keller. I don't know if that was the Southland years or not. You'd have to correct me on this, but they did have a regular season win against Duke when they were number one, which was also very significant, that you kind of think like, well, has the Southland ever done anything like this? So there's definitely been a few outlier teams within the Southland as far as regular season that has done this type of thing. I think even going back to Northwestern State with Mike Coach McConaughey, I think they may have had a win against Iowa, if I'm not mistaken. So yes, this is definitely one of the regular season best Southland Conference teams. They only have 3 losses. You play so many guarantee games so often at this level, and you're trying to raise money because it's part of what you have to do at this level. So to have only 3 losses on the entire year and 2 in a non-conference is extremely impressive. And I think everybody around from being in Lake Charles is just thinking like, okay, what's the ceiling for this team? Can we make a run? Can we get to the dance? Can we win a game in the dance? So they'll ultimately be defined on that, but you have to also define it on just the regular season. This is one of the best regular season Southland Conference teams the conference has ever seen.
So that being said, you mentioned there, everyone wants to know, can they make a run in March? And in order to make a run in March, what do you see as a good matchup for McNeese of who they could play and what style of team they could play in the tournament should they get there?
Yeah, good question. I mean, the who is such a tough one. You just hope that they don't have like a 16 where they have to play a team like a Houston, or even we saw Purdue lose last year. You never want to play a number 1 seed per se, but I do think if they're able to not have an absolute 16 seed, which I think they should be in a higher range to maybe even get a 12 through 14 by chance, just based on their metrics. I mean, they are 65 in Ken Palm. They do have a good net ratings as well. So I think they'll be in a pretty good spot so they won't get, seeded too low. But yeah, I think they definitely have a chance to win the tournament, as far as what type of team. Um, I think as long as it's not a team that has, again, there's very few of these, but if you have kind of that elite size and physicality that has a similar style of play that they have, that just happens to be a little bit bigger, stronger, faster than them, that may not be the best matchup. But I think if you can get a team that doesn't have some of those components, I think they definitely can be able to beat a lot of different teams as far as styles of play. I think they have some, again, the guard play that they have, kind of the versatility, the confidence that they have going into it. They're going to come on any court and think like, hey, we can win this game. So I think, yeah, I don't have a specific team that if they match up with this team, that they will be able to beat them specifically. But I think majority of matchups, I think they will have a great chance to win as long as they're not playing, again, some of the outlier teams, a UConn, a Houston, that is just kind of that same toughness and grit and edge that they play with, but just at a high major level. I think some of the teams that may be a little more skilled may rely a little bit more on their skill level than their toughness. I think they definitely can expose some of those teams without a doubt. But yeah, I think it's going to be an exciting time to see how it all shakes out.
So yeah, so it looks like they're in that 12-13 range, and
Yep.
at max it's looking like a 12 right now. But you and Sean, you do your Cinderella top 25. McNeese has been, I think, number 1 for a majority of the season. They've been top 5 pretty much the entire season. Why is that? How do they stack up against the other mid-major and low-major schools that you guys have had them at 1 pretty much all year?
Yeah, I think if I'm not mistaken, not to correct you on that, you're from a little distance. Up close, I think they've only been number 1 for 2 weeks. So they've been in the top 5 a large majority of it. They just got to number 1, I believe, here, 2 weeks ago. So the last 2 polls, they were at number 1, which is an incredible feat in itself. There's a lot of good mid-major teams. The difference for McNeese is some of it is the timing, right? It's just like the same as the bigger poll. When you lose and who you lose to has something to do with it. McNeese hasn't lost a game since early in conference. So if you look at some of the other conferences, because of the competition within their conference, like a Drake who just punched their ticket last night against Indiana State, those two have been going back and forth all conference. And McNeese has dominated the Southland since an early loss that they had to Southeastern, and they've won every game since. So because of that, they just had a long streak at the end of conference where most of the other teams at this kind of mid-major Cinderella level have had some type of game against someone in their conference that they've lost to. So that has a lot to do with it. But again, they've only lost 3 games all year. So Grand Canyon's one of those teams as well where they've been pretty dominant, but then they lost a game within their conference play. So that has a lot to do with the timing and how they ended up being number one. But as far as how they've been able to do it all year, I mean, again, it's pretty simple, self-explanatory. They've only lost 3 games. So when you've only lost 3 games and you've won 28, I mean, the idea that they can have a 30-win season, there's not very many teams at the mid-major level that ever touch that space. There's not very many teams at the high major level that get to 30 wins or get to 27, 28 wins. It's an incredible record-breaking season, but it's an outlier season. You don't see very many seasons where a team has that kind of success. So it's really just been about that. They've been a dominant team from start to finish of the year. They have their couple losses, but it's been really impressive to see. And even if you think about West Carolina they lost by 2, and that's a team that was also ranked for a large majority of the season. They have the Player of the Year in their conference, and they lost in a 2-point ball game. I think maybe the 5th game in the season. Louisiana Tech is a team that's Conference USA. It's a Louisiana team, but they're a defensive-minded team. They played really well in that particular game. So that's the only 2 losses outside of outside of Southeast Louisiana all year long. So they've lost to some other teams that are at their same level. You give those teams credit, but Louisiana Tech has the Defensive Player of the Year probably in their league. Not to mention they were right on the cusp of winning the conference championship, and there's that own Louisiana flair and rivalry there. And then Western Carolina again has the Player of the Year in their league, and they played in a very, very close game early in the season where I think McNeese has made the adjustments too. I mean, you go in, they haven't played maybe the bigger team. They did beat Michigan, which was a huge one. Michigan obviously hasn't been great. UAB was a really good win, and they bounced back from that Louisiana Tech win. They were dominant and the UAB team is a really good basketball team. So, yeah, I think it's just been really impressive what they've been able to do, and really it's just been the longevity of how much they've been able to win.
So, got to wrap it up in a second, but one last question for you. I asked Ryan the same question. I'm going to ask the other 2. Do you think Will Wade is back next year? And if not, where do you think is a potential landing spot for him should he decide to leave McNeese?
I think he's 100% back. That's just my own feeling. Now, 100% is probably hard to say. I'll say 99 in my opinion, 99% that he's back. I think Will Wade is not given credit again for how smart he is all the time. I think he understands, and he said this to me when we interviewed before this Southland Conference tournament, when we interviewed him. He feels a sense of gratitude, large sense of gratitude to McNeese to giving him a shot to come back in this. They know that they get to host the tournament. You have a chance to get some elite level players at this conference that other people may not be able to get. And why be in a hurry to go back to the highest level when you just signed an extension? So most time you don't sign an extension if you have intentions to leave. I think he has intentions to do some special things here and add that part to his resume and his story. But also, I mean, there's something to be said about when you can build the momentum and have the whole offseason where people can talk about it, and then you have your recruiting class and you can try to outdo what he's done this year. You look at a Dusty May, for example, at FAU. Could he have left last year after the Final Four? Absolutely. But sometimes coming back to do, what may be one more run or whatever the case may be, 2 years of being to have that kind of momentum, it gives you a lot more leverage when it does come to jobs, and you get a lot more chance to let people get more excited about what it is that you're doing. And I think he's just having a ton of fun. When you can go in the conference and you can run through the table and maybe go undefeated or lose 1 game or 2 games, that's a beautiful thing in coaching. Coaching is a lot harder than people think, and so Will Wade is a smart guy. I think he loves this community. He loves Louisiana. He loves McNeese for giving him his shot to get back in this thing. So I think, in my opinion, he's about 99%, if not 100%, that he's coming back at least for one more season to be able to put the cherry on top of whatever they do this season, see if they can outdo it one more season, have some fun with it, and then, it's only a matter of time, yes, that the job market is going to be coming after him, but I think anytime you can have the leverage where you get to say yes, no, or I'm going here, I'm going there, it's a lot better position than just kind of going with what's available.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you joining me, and best of luck. I'm sure I'll run into you today or if you're here the rest of the week. So I really appreciate you joining me.
Yeah, thanks so much, man. Keep up the great work, and best of luck to you guys going forward.
So obviously you're very familiar with mid-major, low-major basketball. Just talk about what you've seen out of this McNeese team this season, and what kind of sets them apart from some of the other nationally relevant mid-major and low-major programs.
I mean, the easy thing right at the top is who's at head coach for the McNeese State Cowboys, and it's Will Wade. When they made this hire, it made national headlines, and I don't think many people were used to McNeese State garnering national attention, but that's what happens when you add a guy like Will Wade to man your team. And then what he did is get a bunch of guys from the portal that typically would not play in the Southland Conference. If he wasn't there, Shahada Wells isn't there, Christian Shoemate entered the portal, he probably would have left. DJ Richards Jr., probably not there. Javon Garcia, like all these dudes are probably not at McNeese State right now if it weren't for getting Will Wade and getting his staff in there, his staff of guys that have been with him for years. He's just the kind of guy that is a really good head coach, and we've seen it obviously. They're 28-3 right now, and they haven't really slipped up very often. The one loss in conference play against Southeastern Louisiana, that was just a tough game, but the other roadblocks, I mean, you look at the game against Corpus Christi, that's a game that they probably should have lost, but they were able to make the big plays when it mattered. They come out with the victory. For a team like McNeese State, for how bad they were last year and how bad they've been in recent seasons, for them to have a dream season like this is one of the best stories in college basketball. I mean, you have a bunch of guys who have played at different spots in their career, and it all seems like they love playing together. They love playing for Will Wade, and you don't really see that kind of thing, especially when you're in Lake Charles and you haven't had a lot to root for in many years. It's pretty awesome to see.
So you mentioned a couple of the players there. Shahade was obviously just named the player of the year on Saturday. He's the first McNeese player to win it in 12 years. What have you seen out of him, and how do you think his experience? He's the only McNeese player who's been to the tournament. He went there twice with TCU, played last year. How do you think? What have you seen out of him, and how do you think his experience might help them in the Southland tournament this week, and then hopefully the NCAA tournament?
I mean, I remember when Wells was playing at UT Arlington and he outdueled Cade Cunningham in an early season game that year when Cade was at Oklahoma State. And that guy was just always wired to score, and obviously he still is. But for me, the two things that he does that aren't scoring is the way he's able to pass and get his teammates involved. He's very unselfish, which for a player of the year kind of guy, he could easily get up like 20 shots a game, but that's not what he does. He's an efficient scorer. He picks his spots. He's not going to be some shot chucker. He's shooting 47% from the field and 40% from three, averaging close to 5 assists per game, not a ton of turnovers. He's very unselfish, and he's a great leader, and I think that's really what sets him apart from a lot of other guys, because the way he's able to just lead this team under pressure in the big moments. Wells is going to calm things down when they're pressuring full court. He's going to calm things down. Just for me, this was a guy that was a role player at TCU. He wasn't going to play above Mike Miles or Damian Baugh, but he was just a solid role player that you could rely on. And obviously TCU won a tournament game last year, but he was one of the better guards in the Sun Belt over there at a UT Arlington. So the fact that he was able to be a really good there and translate that into being a really good player at McNeese State, it just goes to show the kind of talent that Will Wade was able to bring in with him, because he's an absolute superstar, and that's why he won Conference Player of the Year.
That said, the other name people mention, you've seen him on SportsCenter Top Plays, you've seen him receive all these accolades. What have you seen out of Christian Shoemate? Obviously, like you mentioned, he entered the portal, decided to come back. What have you seen out of him that leads you to believe maybe McNeese could make some noise?
I mean, he's one of the more electrifying players in college basketball, obviously, and it's not even close to the way he's able to throw down some of those dunks. He's one of the best dunkers, if not the best dunker in college basketball. But what it comes down to for me is that he is playing such a different role than he played last year at McNeese State, because obviously he had a higher usage rate under John Aiken last year, around 24%. This year it's around 21%. They did a lot of isolation stuff with him. That's not happening as much because you have really good guards this year. He's able to play down in the post. He's able to still handle the ball up top, obviously, with his athleticism. But he's able to settle into his role. He's not being relied upon to shoot the ball as much as he did last year. Shot the ball almost 11 times per game last year, around 8 this year. He's more efficient. He's averaging less points, but you feel his impact and feel like it's a little stronger than it was last year. And he's just becoming a winning player. Not that he wasn't before, but his impact is impacting winning. And I think his numbers being down 3 points per game, it really doesn't mean anything because he's doing it more efficiently. I think he's one of the more important players on a mid-major team in college basketball because of his defensive ability, his athleticism. He's not a great shooter, but he's just all over the glass at all times, averaging close to 10 rebounds per game. If McNeese State misses a shot, he will always be there trying to get an offensive rebound and create another possession. He's just a dirty work guy. He does a little bit of everything. You have to love a player that plays with that much intensity and love for the game.
You mentioned it there. He averages almost a double-double. He just broke the record for most double-doubles in McNeese history, but that's despite his size. One of the knocks a lot of people have on McNeese is their size, seeing they don't have a player above 6'8". Do you think that might be a problem if should they get into March? And if so, how can they overcome that?
I mean, we've seen smaller teams manage to win games in the NCAA tournament as a mid-major team. You look at Oral Roberts, they started Kevin O'Banner, who ended up playing in the Big 12 at Texas Tech. He was around 6'8", 6'9". St. Peter's, they were a really small team, but they were tough. Their guys played bigger, which is the case for McNeese State. They're a lot different teams because McNeese State is just so much better offensively and they have more talent. But that St. Peter's team, they were a 15 seed. They won a couple tournament games. They won a game against Purdue, who had Zach Edey still, and they had Casey Nadefo and Fusini and Hassan Drame. None of those dudes were above like 6'7". So the fact that McNeese State has a guy like C.J. Felder, who was a very solid role player at the high major level for Boston College and Florida, and then you have another guy in Antavian Collum, who's 6'9", 245 pounds. Like, that dude is a absolute load inside. He can shoot the ball from three. He's going to be tough to stop too. And then you have Shoemate, who's only 6'6", but he plays so much bigger, like you said. I think their size really won't be that much of a problem. We've already seen them beat a high major team earlier this year in Michigan. Obviously, Michigan didn't end up being very good, but they've played bigger teams. VCU, another team that has a lot of size, they were able to have their way with them. They won that game in the first game of the season. They haven't been hindered by their size this year, and I don't think it'll happen because they have so much athleticism and their guys play bigger than they are. I think they'll be fine despite not having a ton of length.
So you talked about the Corpus Christi game a little while ago. McNeese, they've won in all sorts of ways. I mean, they might still, but for a while they led the nation in win margin. I think they were at 19.2. They've blown teams out, but they've also won when they haven't looked great. The Lamar game, fewest points they've scored all season, 58, and yet they still won. The Corpus Christi game, like you mentioned, how important is that, being able to win despite not having your best stuff and being able to blow teams out? How important will that be should they get into the NCAA tournament?
I mean, it'll be very important, even in the conference tournament. How many one seeds in their respective conference tournament have we seen go down already? McNeese State is going to be the hunted in every single conference tournament game because everybody knows if they beat McNeese State, they're going to be on SportsCenter, they're going to be on ESPN, they're going to be the headline. So beating McNeese State is going to be the national championship for a lot of these Southland teams because a lot of them aren't going to play in the NCAA tournament, so they have to be ready for that. But they've been ready for every punch so far this season. I mean, they've had a couple close games, but largely they've just dominated teams. And like you said, even on their bad nights, they can still win. For me, the biggest thing is a lot of mid-major teams are reliant on one side of the floor dictating whether they're going to win or lose that game. McNeese State can win on either side of the floor. They're a really even team offensively and defensively. They're top 10 in three-point percentage. They're top 10 in turnover percentage defensively. They just do so many different things well that impact winning games. I think they're going to be just fine when it comes to the NCAA tournament because of how good they are on both ends of the floor.
Like you said, a lot of people see their offense and see how good they've been on offense. And I mean, when DJ Richards coming off the bench, he can make six threes in a row, feels like whenever he wants. But they had two players on the all defensive team. Obviously, Shoemate won the defensive player of the year. How good is this team's defense comparatively to a lot of the mid majors and even some of the major schools they might face in the NCAA tournament?
I mean, just their pressure just really bothers teams. I mean, 23% turnover rate. That's as good as you'll find in college basketball, sixth nationally. That's up there at the Houstons of the world in college basketball. But the thing to me that really stands out, we talked about their size earlier, but they are one of the best interior defensive teams in college basketball. Teams only shoot 45% on them from inside the arc, 24th nationally according to KenPom. They are just a dominant 2-point defensive team, and teams oftentimes don't even want to drive on them. They're going to shoot threes. Teams shoot a ton of threes against them. That can kind of dictate whether you're going to win or lose a game. But when you have that kind of defensive pressure, Will Wade obviously brings some of that pressure from his days at BCU, and we've seen him adjust his style according to how good his teams are. The year they had Cam Thomas at LSU, they were a poor defensive team, great offensive team. The next season, when they had Tari Eason, one of the best defenders in the country, they were one of the best defensive teams in the country. So they can really adjust. He can really adjust how he does things. And this team, the fact that they're so well balanced just goes to show how in tune he is with this team, because they're just solid. They do everything well, and they don't shoot a ton of threes. They're not going to force the issue, but that defensive pressure is going to cause some problems. We've seen some teams that pressure defenses in the NCAA tournament really cause some fits. So I think that length and athleticism could cause some problems for teams in the big dance should they get there.
So you do the Cinderella poll along with Brian. They've been, I believe, number one the last 2 weeks, and they've been top 5 for a while. Why is that? How do you see them stacking up as opposed to App State, who just fell in their tournament? But how do you see them stacking up versus some of these other mid-major schools who are trying to win their conference tournaments and get into the NCAA tournament?
I mean, when you win games, when you win 28 games and you win 17 games in conference play, you're going to be ranked highly in those kind of polls. And they just haven't had a reason to rank them any lower than top 3 throughout most of the season. And it just goes to show consistency is a big thing. I mean, some teams go through lulls where they're going to lose 5 straight or lose a couple in a row. McNeese State hasn't lost more than 1 game in a row at all this season. They lost against Western Carolina, beat Texas State, lost to Louisiana Tech, then they didn't lose again for a month and a half. Then they haven't lost again in over a month since losing to Southeastern Louisiana. They just don't do a lot of losing, and when you win a lot of games in college basketball, that's going to have you ranked highly in mid-major polls.
So they're currently on the 12-13 line. It obviously could shift with a lot of the conference tournaments, the low major conference tournaments finishing up over the next couple days. What do you think a good matchup would be for McNeese when they get into the NCAA tournament, if they get into the tournament?
Obviously, a team that turns the ball over a lot is going to be something that's beneficial to them. A team that doesn't have really good ball handling guards, I think, would help them quite a bit. I look at a team like Dayton, if they're able to get to the 5 line, they're probably a 6 seed right now, but Javon Bennett, their point guard, is dealing with injuries. So if he's able to suit up either way, I think that could be a good matchup for them. I think a nightmare matchup would be BYU because of how well they shoot the ball from the outside. I think that could be a really difficult matchup for McNeese State. Although BYU doesn't have a ton of size, they shoot the ball so well from deep, and teams tend to do that often against McNeese State. I think they'd be fine against the South Carolina. South Carolina is obviously one of the more surprising teams in college basketball. I think that McNeese State could win that game. You look at some of the other teams in the mix. Auburn, they have a dominant big man in Janai Broome. Alabama, they don't defend anything, but they can really shoot it. I think that could be a decent matchup for McNeese State, and obviously you don't want to play Kentucky or Illinois, who were the top 2-4 seeds according to the bracket matrix, because those two teams can really score the basketball, and they have some pros on those teams. So I think the ideal scenario is getting on the 12 line, facing a South Carolina, San Diego State, maybe a Wisconsin or Utah State, a Dayton. Any of those teams, I think McNeese State will be a very trendy upset pick against.
That said, what do they have to do, or who do they have to root for to get on that 12 line? Because I mean, for a majority of the season, they've been at 12 and 11 in some polls earlier in the year, but now it's starting to trend towards that 13 line. What do they have to do to stay on that 12 line?
I mean, I think one thing that could happen is assuming or not assuming, I guess, but if Florida Atlantic wins the AAC tournament, that would knock South Florida out of the tournament, and obviously they won the conference regular season, so they're sitting in the tournament as of now. But if FAU is able to win the conference tournament, that knocks South Florida out. I believe that would probably put McNeese State on the 12 line. But maybe you want Samford to lose. We'll know as this goes up probably. And same deal, James Madison. If those two teams win, they're right in the mix for a 12 seed. But you definitely want South Florida to get knocked out. Just don't even worry about that. Grand Canyon is another team that's really on the upper end of the 12 line. You want them to lose the WAC. You want Princeton to probably lose in the Ivy League tournament. So if any of those things happen, I think that could be really beneficial to McNeese State landing on that coveted 12 line.
That said, a lot of it depends obviously on the matchup, but what do you see maybe as McNeese's ceiling? Are they capable of making a Sweet 16 Cinderella run, or is it just hoping to win one game and that's maybe as good as it gets?
You just have to get hot at the right time. I don't think there's a ceiling necessarily. I would say Sweet 16 is very possible depending on matchups, like we said earlier. But this team has enough talent. They have high major dudes on this team. They have dudes that would play at the Big 12 level, that would play at the Big 10 level. They have dudes that play together. They have an identity. They've won a lot of games. I think that all bodes really well for making a run in the NCAA tournament. So I think the sky's the limit for this team.
So kind of all the questions I have for this team, but question I'm asking all the rest of the guys too.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think Will Wade is in Lake Charles next year? And if not, where do you think maybe is a spot he could end up?
Oh man, that's a $1 million question, right? I mean, that's what you're signing up for, and obviously, I think Heath Schroyer knew that when he got him, it could be a 1-year deal. Obviously, sign an extension. I think my gut tells me he will be back next year because for me, Will Wade, I've interviewed him a couple times. He's a very straightforward guy, whether you love it or hate it. That's just who he is, and obviously, I think everybody knows that at this point about him. I think he's a guy that will wait for the right job. He's not just going to jump at another high major job. He didn't even have to take this job. He could have easily retired and just sat with his money that he made from LSU and these other jobs for the rest of his life and not worked another day, and he would have been just fine. But he loves basketball. He loves winning. I think he needs the right thing, and that is an ACC job. Is that back in the SEC? Obviously, there was some steam with DePaul. I don't think that'll happen. I don't think there's going to be enough jobs opening in this cycle at the high major level for him to just jump at one like that. I think he's going to wait it out and wait for a better job next year, and I think that job will come along after another potential NCAA tournament run in his second season in Lake Charles, because I think that's where he'll be next year.
Kevin, like I mentioned, you do a lot nationally. Talk about this McNeese team, kind of what they've done this year and kind of what you see out of this McNeese team.
Yeah, I mean, obviously a very dynamic group. Talent level that, probably resembles, closer to a mid plus, which is, I think the term I would use. It's, high Sun Belt, American, Mountain West, A10, like they have that level of talent on this roster. Obviously, guys who've played at the highest level, been in a lot of big games. I think that has helped them. Certainly a relevance factor that Will brings just because of his, his persona, but also obviously the past and some of the history. Maybe not quite the spectacle of like the Patino return at Iona, but I do think it has captured some attention, and obviously like winning games helps. And to go opening night and beat a VCU program that's one of the best in the sport. Obviously, Will wasn't a part of that game, but his fingerprints all over it, right? I mean, that's a big deal. That's a massive win. To beat Michigan is a massive deal. And again, neither of those teams have been maybe as good as people might have anticipated in the preseason. Certainly Michigan hasn't, but it's hard to do what they've done. I mean, this is, and the Southland right now is a league that like is going to produce 15 and 16 seeds, and it's going to it is very hard just kind of from a resource standpoint to elevate above that fray. And so obviously, McNeese is probably, the best, if not the best, one of the best jobs in the league, and has the resources and the commitment, and then obviously increase that with Will, and that has helped. But to be in this spot at 28-3 and the potential to be a team that could make noise in the tournament is a big deal, and right at that level.
So obviously the goal is to make noise in the tournament, like you said there. To do so, guard play is such a big part of March, and Shahade Wells was just named the newcomer and the player of the year for the Southland Conference. What do you see in him, and how important is his experience being the only player on this team who's been to the NCAA tournament, going with TCU twice? How important is that going to be for them should they get in?
I mean, look, he's a guy who can take over a game. I mean, he can really, really create offense, obviously for himself, but also for others. And I think when you have a point guard who is as dynamic as he is, it just opens everything up, right? I mean, teams are going to have to game plan around it. And, you can go through the history of March, like the teams that have, pulled upsets. Oftentimes it has been driven by a, ridiculous, one-off showing by, a smaller guard. And so, yeah, he's a scary player. He's a guy who, certainly belongs at the highest level in college basketball. Also a better defender than I think people give credit for. I mean, a guy who is really, really good on the ball and can be disruptive and get them easy offense. But yeah, I mean, it's hard for, especially now with NIL, it is incredibly hard to get like rotation players from high major programs to come down, if you will, and play at a mid. So the fact that, obviously the relationship there and was able to get that done, like obviously that's massive and a big reason why they are where they are.
Another player who he entered the transfer portal last year, decided to come back, Christian Shoemate. The big knock for against McNeese is their size, but Shoemate tends to play a lot taller than he is, a lot bigger than he is. What do you see out of him, and do you see McNeese's size as a potential flaw as they get into March?
I mean, the athleticism is phenomenal, right? I mean, obviously everyone's seen the dunks. He's as explosive an athlete as there is in college basketball. Look, I don't think the size is necessarily like the scariest thing in the world. Look, I think there's fewer and fewer teams that are just playing post-up basketball right now. I'm not sitting there and like looking at my draw and being like, man, I think as a 4 seed, we're just gonna get like, bodied on the block. It's just not how it is anymore. Certain teams, obviously, like if you drew, Auburn and had to deal with Janai Broom, that'd be tricky, right? Like things like that. Those types of matchups scare me, but I also think you have to take that as an opportunity to, use your advantage, right? When you can play smaller and have Shoemate out there as a small ball 5 potentially, and space the floor out and get guys opportunities to drive to the rim, right? You have to take advantage of that. Obviously, like they didn't get killed on the glass in either up game that they played, right? Obviously I think lost the rebounding battle by 2 against VCU. Won the rebounding battle against UAB. Obviously a very good team that beat Memphis and has been around, and then against Michigan, even on the glass. So they haven't gotten destroyed. They're athletic enough and physical enough and old enough that I think they can hang in. Obviously a challenge, but I think it's a challenge that pretty much everyone runs into this time of year at the mid-major level.
McNeese's defense, as you mentioned, Shahade Wells doesn't get the credit he probably deserves defensively. I think he's second in the nation in steals per game. He averages 2.9. Shoemate was the defensive player of the year. What do you see them on? How do you see them stacking up as we get into March on the defensive side of the ball?
Look, I think the turnovers are the thing that really makes them dynamic defensively, and it's something that can cause a lot of problems. I will say that oftentimes those numbers get inflated when you play, lower levels of competition, right? I mean, obviously, like, again, you can look through like the up games, if you will, if we're trying to predict, are you winning in March? 14 turnovers for VCU. It's not a ton, but it's enough to probably keep you in a game. UAB turned it over only 10 times, right? Michigan turned it over 15 times, but they've had point guard issues all year, right? Like, I think the idea that McNeese is going to come in against a power conference opponent that has good guard play and turn him over 20 times, probably not reality. But it's a big part of how they play, right? It's critical for them to get some easy ones off of that. Turnover margin has really been a huge part of why they've won. So, yeah, look, I think some of the things that they do defensively maybe are they're really well served to win in the Southland, really well served to beat lower competition. Might not be as effective against high majors, but can they be solid enough defensively and be disruptive? Yeah, I think so. And if you can do that and then score and put pressure on the game, and in the second half, you got a chance to win.
So the big question everyone wants to know is what looks like a good matchup for McNeese should they win the Southland, should they get into the NCAA tournament? What do you see as potentially a good matchup scheme wise, and what do you think maybe McNeese's ceiling is should they get into the tournament?
Yeah, look, I think they can win a game. I'm not convinced that they're like this year's Cinderella and they're going, to the Final Four or whatever, but I'm never convinced that, right? I mean, if you told me St. Peter's 2 years ago it's going to the Final Four, I would have called you nuts. Or not the Final Four, the Elite Eight, whatever, So yeah, like I think matchup dependent. I think the 4 seeds are much stronger than the 5s. Like I'm, just looking at the bracket matrix right now. Like, there's teams on the 4 line right now of like Kentucky, Illinois, Alabama, and Auburn. Like those are scary teams. Those are all potential top 10 caliber teams that have either underachieved or had bad losses or whatever and put themselves in that position. Work your way down to the 5. That's why it's critical, obviously, if you can get to that 12 line if you're McNeese. Like, all right, like I'm not quaking in my boots at the concept of playing South Carolina. I'm not super scared of Clemson. I'm not super scared of BYU, right? Like those teams are a lot more even from a talent standpoint, right? I mean, when you're playing, the teams I mentioned on the 4 line, those are groups that I think are just, they're loaded with elite recruits, right? I mean, up and down the roster, it's 4 and 5-star guys. I think it just makes it hard. Both all the other teams have been, pretty consistent. Obviously, Kentucky had the, one weird loss to McNeese, but not McNeese, excuse me, UNC Wilmington. But I do think overall, the seeding probably matters more than the individual matchup. I think if they can get up to that 12, it really opens their world up a little bit. If they're on the 13 line, I think it's gonna be a little bit harder.
That said, they've been on the 12 for majority of the year, it seems like, and now they're kind of fading towards that 13 as the conference tournaments become a little more clear. What do you think they have to do, or who do you think they have to root for and able to be that 12 seed and not fall down to that 13 line?
Yeah, I mean, you're hoping for 1 seed chaos, right? So, UC Irvine, and again, part of it's just challenging. Like, how much will the committee weigh conference strength versus team strength? Right, McNeese is, I think, higher in a lot of the metrics than a team like UC Irvine, but UC Irvine is going to, would be the projected winner of a much better league. UC Irvine obviously is a great program, had a lot of success. Big West is very good, top to bottom. So how is that weighed? I think will be interesting, but you're hoping that teams like that lose, right? Other teams in that like 12-13 discussion, right? The Mid-American, Akron and Toledo both kind of finished the season weird. You figure that they would be 12s or 13s, right? Maybe there's some, chaos there and you wind up with, a lower seed in that conference tournament. The WAC, anyone but Grand Canyon probably comes in below McNeese on the DS curve. So things like that, right? This conference tournament weekend, you want as many top seeds to go down as you can, and hope that it helps you down the line.
That said, McNeese has pretty good bench play, and DJ Richards obviously being the name there. Mike Saunders, who came from Utah, he's picked it up a little bit, and CJ Felder, he missed last week's game. He was sick. He's expected to go tomorrow on Tuesday in the semifinals. How important do you see their bench play being, and will that be a factor through the Southland tournament, obviously, as if should they get into the NCAA tournament as well?
I think the bench stuff is big because it's scary when I think there's a lot of mid-major teams that can match up 1 through 5 with a higher level program, but when the benches come in is when you get really screwed, right? And so yes, in single elimination basketball you can play, you can be very, very aggressive and play guys 40 minutes, but like foul trouble's a thing. And so I think that's the thing I would be pleased about bench wise. Yes, it helps in a conference tournament setting, but I think McNeese should be able to overwhelm a lot of those teams with their talent. I think once you get to the NCAA tournament, the current concern you would have is, all right, like what happens when Javon Garcia gets 2 fouls, or someone key on your roster? Do you get exposed? And so the fact that you have a DJ Richards, you have a little bit more depth again than your average mid or low major team, I think certainly helps them.
So I'm asking everyone this. I asked Ryan and Brian, and I'll ask Sean the same question. Do you see Will Wade staying next year? And if he does not stay, where do you think are a potential landing spot for him to maybe end up?
Yeah, I think it's more likely than not that he's back for another year. I think, number one, I think he's learned that, he doesn't have to be in a rush and wants to get to the right thing. Obviously, if that right job opens, then, I'm sure he'd consider it. There's certain dominoes that could play out that might open the door for Will Wade to get a job this spring. But I do think the more likely outcome is that he comes back another year, wins again at a super high level, and then probably moves on after year two. That also clears some of the NCAA stuff that is still hanging over his head in recruiting and whatnot. And it gives its ADs a little bit more time to get comfortable with it, right? Obviously, it's it's a strange situation in that, not that what he was doing would be legal now, but it's closer to legal than it was, right? So it's not like it's not as though he was doing stuff that I think is impossible to swallow. I do think it's still going to take a little bit of time. So I would imagine he has one more year at McNeese, but you never know which dominoes fall. And if the right thing opens up, I wouldn't be shocked if he wound up somewhere else next year.